Hi, Watercolor 2 class. I am going to show you your next step of what to do once you complete glazing. And from glazing, we're going to move into our value. And this is actually just all steps going into what will eventually be a still life that we'll be completing in class. But I wanted to start back at the beginning, kind of where we did in Watercolor 1. So there should be, this paper I'm working on is 8 inches by 18, and it should be all pre-cut for you. And I left it on my desk, so hopefully it's still there somewhere. I want to give you a little bit more room to work with, and it is watercolor paper. It's a little nicer. What I had done before I just turned the camera on is I just sketched out four different shapes, which I'm going to turn to forms here. So watercolor 1, we had done a cone, and I showed you how to do the wet on wet for that, and I'll show you again with this. You've probably done it. You may have done a sphere if you've taken an intro class or a painting 1 class. We've probably done something with value and form, and then cylinder, and then also a cube, because sometimes it's nice to have those hard edges. Say if you're in your still life, if you're painting a book, or I don't know, anything else that's kind of geometric, or if you have like some type of box you have, whatever it is, if it has a hard edge, I'd still like to give you at least an idea of how you go about painting it. So that's the plan for this part of it anyway. So I have my clean water. Make sure you start with clean water. And I have my paper towel. And I use a paper towel quite a bit when I paint. It's nice if you need to clean off your brush, or if you need to dab some extra paint off that you didn't intend to get there. But I'm going to start with the cone just as a simple review as for what you did in watercolor 1. Even if that was a couple of years ago, it shouldn't have changed. And then I'll move through these. And I'll try to go kind of quick because this could be a long video if I talk like I usually do. So I'm going to do the wet on wet just for the cone. I'll show you some other techniques. So I'm going to just get my clean water and my clean brush. And right now I'm just wetting the inside of this rounded triangle, which will become our cone. So get that kind of wet. I'll push that down. And I'm not going to paint the cast shadow yet, so I'm just going to leave that alone. So if you remember, anywhere you put water down, your watercolors will travel. And you can kind of see, hopefully you can see, this little bit of sheen. That's what you're wanting. You don't want a big giant puddle, but you do want it to kind of glisten a little bit. So I'm going to use purple. So I'm going to grab my purple and turn my tray around so you can see what I'm up to. Get this a little bit more wet. And because it's wet and wet, it's going to be kind of loose. So if my cast shadow is going off this way, my light source will be on this end. So I'm going to start kind of on the back end and drop my coloring, because this will be the darkest value that you have. And if you remember, it kind of starts to bleed over to where the water is. So again, I'll just make a line, grab a little more paint. Kind of want that dark side over here. And if you have different brushes, I'm using kind of a small brush, but I didn't plan ahead and bring some brushes home with me. And clean that brush off, dry it off. And since we already have some pigment on the paper and there's water on it, I'm just gonna kind of scrub it back and forth, lightening as I go. I can dry my brush off. I can actually roll my brush and take some of that paint out of there if there's too much. So I'm hoping you guys can kind of see them. You're actually able to take paint away, which is something that's really nice about watercolors, that you can take a little bit of that extra pigment you didn't care for away. So if we're just looking at this, let's pretend we have a light source coming down this way, hits the front of the cone. As the cone rounds out, it starts to get dark on the back edge. And I'm just going to put a real fine line right back here, get a little bit more water, and really push that value. If you remember, the more value you have, the more realistic usually things become. So it's okay to make the artistic decision if you want to make things a little bit more dramatic, I guess you could say, with light and darks. So my darkest value, I'm not going to put right up against the edge, almost, but not quite. I want to keep just a little bit lighter value right in the edge, and that's just for your reflected light. And once again, that's if the light's coming down, hitting this object, it's going to hit my table, and a little bit's going to reflect back up onto the object itself. And so if you have just a little bit in there, it makes it look a little bit more realistic. And then usually, your cast shadow, that should be a fairly dark value. It doesn't always, like, I'm going to actually discourage you from just putting straight up black down. The blacks in our watercolor set are actually very, very good, meaning, I bled a little bit into mine, meaning that they'll turn black very quickly. You don't need a lot, and it's going to become black very quickly. So I'm just filling in this cast shadow, finish it off. You can see how that little mistake I put is starting to bleed. I'm going to dry my brush off, and I'll just kind of pick some of that back up, take it out, and smooth it all back over again. Take that little bit, push it up, and erase it. So that's what we did in Watercolor 1 as a review. You can, if you choose, if you want to do all 4 of these different shape to form conversions, doing it wet on wet, you certainly can. I'm going to kind of push you to maybe trying to do something else. So I'll move to the cube. So square, make it 3-dimensional. I used a ruler for these. I used a ruler for the edges, and I used I think a soup can or something for this circle because I want to get a nice circle. But if your perspective is a little off on your cube, it will affect the way it looks, but it won't affect your grade. Mostly, we're playing with value, and I want it to make it look like it's 3-dimensional. So I'll change colors. I'll move to my red. So I'll get some water into my red. And I'm sorry about this shadow. I don't know how to get rid of it. It's how it's set up here at my house. But I want, at least for this one, again, all the light source on these are coming from the same spot. So the light's always coming this way on these objects. So I'm going to actually make a little puddle. I dripped a little bit. I'm going to make a little puddle in my mixing tray because I want kind of a lighter wash, at least on the top. And how we get things lighter, which you should have learned from the glazing color wheel, is that you add more water. So I'm just adding water straight now until I thin out this paint a little bit. So now, still a little bit too much. I'm just going to mix a little bit more in. And now I'm just going to, you can either paint all of it because you're going to be going over it. I'm trying to move it kind of quickly so I don't have time to wait for things to dry. So I'm just going to paint this light little, almost pink, right on top of my sphere. And the reason I'm choosing to make it light on the top is because if you think about how the sphere would be sitting on a table with just a single light source, most of the light would be directed right on top of it. That's what's going to catch the most light. So that's what we want to make the lightest. Then I'll grab some red, I'll mix it in, splattering all over the rest of my paper. And then now, this side can be kind of dark. I'm not going to mix any other colors in with it. I'm just going to give it a nice, really, really strong red. And whatever you choose for the colors, that's your call. I'm just playing, I guess. And then you'll just continue to fill in. You can see I'm starting to bleed into that one, so I'll have to be nice if I wait for that to dry, but that's okay. Again, you know how to take it away by having a nice dry brush. Okay, and I'm doing this with like a round tip or a point tip. If you have like a flathead brush, which I believe I told you guys to grab on that first day or first or second day, that is really, really helpful when you're doing hard edges because that can keep a nice straight line as opposed to some of these points because they kind of flare out as you put pressure on them. But it's what I got, so that's what I'm going to show you. So there we have two sides. The light side, a little bit kind of maybe you could call it like a medium value, like a mid-value tone. And then on the back side, that's where the majority of your shadow is going to be. I'm going to challenge you, whatever color you choose, I'd like you to mix the complementary into it. And the reason for that is the complementary is going to make it darker because it's going to become a neutral. So it'll be kind of like a dark, dark red. If you add too much green, or for me, if I had too much green, it'll kind of come brown. And that's okay too. As long as the value itself is darker, it's going to look right. So I'm going to clean off my brush because I'm going to go into a new color, grab some water, get my green ready. Here's my green, and I'm just going to start mixing it into this red. And it's turning into kind of almost I'll try to get it into the light a little bit, almost into like a burgundy color. That's what you're looking for. You want to mute your color with your complementary. And if you watch what happens, how dark it starts to appear. I'll get a little bit more green in there, maybe a little bit more red too. I have too much water in my tray. It should make it look like this back edge. I have to get that out of there. This back edge is going to be much darker. And time-wise on these, I think I've planned to give you guys 2 to 3 days to finish these all up. So I'm obviously kind of hurrying through this to get this done to show you in a timely manner what to do. I do expect you guys to take a little bit more time, make them look correct. You can see that because my top value was still wet, some of my darker bled into it, so I'm going to get my brush wet, dry it off, and just kind of take that off and put it back into my paper towel. Because that does skew the way it looks a little bit. And then I'll grab my just straight red and add a little bit back to it. And then finally, just for the cast shadow, I'm just going to grab more green and more red and kind of not use as much water. So it's going to be a little bit more opaque and thicker and darker. And that is what I'll make my actual cast shadow with. So obviously with one light source, everything looks really dramatic because it's lit up just from one side. In our classroom, we don't really have one light source, excuse me, because we have fluorescence. The bigger picture is we can use a phone to put like the flashlight on and shine it down on your objects so you have like an easier light source to paint from. That's not a necessary thing we have to do, but it tends to make it a little bit easier. So brush that out. And I suppose I should have stopped that, but I got carried away. So that's our cone, that's our cube. Move my, see that big shadow, so annoying. I'm just gonna scooch it, scooch. Right there to the sphere. And I'll change to blue, I guess. So I'll get some water here and grab my blue. So this one, I'm gonna mix up a few different values right away. I'm gonna get a bunch of kind of light blue. I'm gonna make a little bit darker blue right here. That'll be like my mid-tones. And then my core shadow I'll just grab straight from the tray and as I go here. So I'll clean my brush up and show you. So again, light source is coming up here, up from the top left. I want my reflected light to be in this general area. So I'm gonna grab my light blue and I'm gonna leave it, I'm not even gonna touch that middle where I want that reflected light. I'm just gonna make a little circle. And I'm gonna drag that little glob of paint all over until it kind of runs out. And if I go too far down, that's okay because I'm just going to be covering that up anyway. Okay. Then I'm going to grab a little bit more of my mid-tones and start in this general area, kind of the midpoint. And if you see what I'm doing, I'm curving my lines up. That's because it's a ball, it's a sphere. So if you go straight across, it's going to look really wonky and weird. It's not going to look like a sphere. So you kind of want to curve your values to the shape of your object. And that's true if you're doing a portrait, if you're doing like a nose, anything that you're really shading, it's no different than a pencil. If you're curving to the form, it's going to look more realistic. And that's obviously what we're trying to accomplish here. I am going to close in this reflect light. It seems a bit much. A little bit more. And then I'm going to, Then I'm going to actually just dive right into my blue because I know I can make this fairly dark. I need a little bit of water though. And I'm just going to start painting in my core shadow. So I'm going to go just grabbing and putting it straight onto the paper. And you want to go almost up to that edge. And if in your head you're saying, well, that's because you need your reflected light, Mr. Check, you are correct. That is the reason. I don't know if you can see this really hard line. It's okay to have a hard line somewhere, but that seems just a little bit too much. So I just grab some water and I'm going to use the side of my brush and kind of try to blend some of that back in a little bit. It just seems a bit too much. That definitely isn't right. Let's take that out. Grab some more of my mid-tone here. Okay, so that little bit of reflected light, I'm going to go back to my mid-tones, and I'm just going to, just on the very edge, put that in. And if you want, like I'm just using one color, what you could do is if I wanted to grab some purple, let's take some purple, I can drop that in there and that's going to blend really nicely with the blue, and that should darken it to even push those values even more. So then our contrast is cranked up and it makes it look even more, a little bit more realistic. That's still, I don't like that too much. Anyway, now I'm just kind of playing, but so if I took that purple, and again, you don't have to, it's just because I'm having fun. I'm going to grab some really, really dark blue purple, call it blue violet. So I'm taking a little bit of blue, mixing it with my violet, and I'm going to try to stay away from touching the actual wet paint because then it'll bleed like it did in the cube. And then you're just going to put in your cast shadow. So again, usually your cast shadow should be usually a little darker than the rest of what you got going on. The idea with the cast shadow is that it should reflect the colors of what the table is itself. So, for this exercise, you can just kind of choose whatever color you'd like. All right, and then finally, because this is running a little long, the cylinder. I'll try to do this one fairly quick, if not maybe it'll be a little sloppy. Oh, I gotta go this way. There we go. There's our cylinder. And my water's kind of dark, so I'm going to think I'll just choose our green here. And I'll make another little puddle. So I'll do this one similar to our sphere. I'll make a little puddle of color. Our light, this is going to be over there, so I'm going to make sure I get most of my light colors out this way. And then right about in the middle, I would give you about right in the middle or so. You have to imagine this being a cylinder. So the light's going to stop touching it right about the middle of that point. And at that point is when you can start getting a little darker. Finish off my light tones before I get too far here. And in the back, you'll want some nice dark value, whatever that ends up being. So I'm going to mix a little bit of blue just to drop that value down a little bit. And I am giving you a few days with this. I would like you to take your time. Do your best to make these look realistic. Because really this is kind of key to practicing to make sure that when we actually do the actual still life, they look realistic. And that's what we're going for this one. In the other projects that we're going to do, we'll loosen up a little bit. And you'll have a chance to go with a little bit looser watercolor. But I think it's good, and I think it's important to kind of understand how to be nice and tight with it before you go loose. So the top part, I need a little bit more water. My water's getting a little dirty. I should change it out. But just like the sphere that you can't see right now, you want it to be kind of light on the top because, again, the light's coming down, so it's going to hit the top. So we want to make sure that the top part's nice and light and the back part's nice and dark. You can see I left my light edge over here. If I were to take more time, I'd probably darken this a little bit because it still seems a little light to me. But then finally, again, you're going to add your cast shadow, just like you did before. And the cast shadow should really come all the way to that spot where it starts to turn on you and go backwards. Anyway, I think you guys get the idea of those simple forms. That was my really quick little demo. The last part, once you get all 4 of these done, your final part, and maybe the most challenging, is I want you to choose a different object, not a normal one, some type of, you could call it organic object or anything that, something else that has a single point light source. So for me, this is a banana that I did during study hall in the lecture hall. So in the lecture hall, they have really strong lights because of those overhead can lights. So the light was coming down, hit my banana that I later ate for snack. But then I obviously put my big cast shadow in and, all the other little bits that made it a little bit more interesting. So similar idea, my reflected light, I'll use a pencil to point. My reflected light is this really light little yellow part, this wash, because that's, again, the light was coming straight down, so that's what hit it. And then as it started to curve over, my values got darker on either side. So the lighter part came forward, and then obviously the cast shadow it helps it pop it off a little bit. So you'll want to choose something that probably has some way that you can see the cast shadow. So because I do want a cast shadow, I want you to have some type of reflected light and those midtones, same as what you just got done doing over here, but then you'll have to choose something else to do. So that's what I'd like you to do once you're done with the glazing color wheel, and I will see you when I return. Thank you very much.